This is Nick and Human Limits, and that's our episode 2. And we have Mitch Burnett, the yoga teacher, mobility specialist today again. And we want to dedicate the whole episode to fitness myth busting. We want to explore some common misconceptions or concepts to either bust or prove them. So thank you very much, Mitch, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Feel free to put them on if that's comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's jump right in. The first one, I come across it quite often. Yoga and how bad it is for you. Some say that yoga overstretches the muscles that are not supposed to be stretched at all.
Mm-hmm. It's a very realistic concern, and I think that it has definitely manifested in the world for sure. I would say, though, given accurate understanding and proper guidance, it can be overcome quite easily. The difference between being in a passive range of motion versus an active range of motion, helping someone discover the difference in their body for themselves, and then cueing classes in such a way that maintains a certain degree of active mobility versus passive is how you're going to mitigate that. It's definitely a thing where if, particularly someone that's hypermobile, needs to be even more mindful that they're not just hanging out in the joints. And by what I mean by that is that very often we can use gravity to kind of pull us into certain postures and kind of relax into it as if you were just letting all the tension just stretch. And that's going to result in things like ligaments and tendons getting overly stretched, especially when you're doing the same, repetitive exercises in an incorrect manner over a long period of time. 100%. However, if you are learning the proper principles of how to lift the body away from the floor and repel gravity by creating co-contractions of muscles around the joint complexes, etc., you'll protect the ligaments and tendons, and you'll actually strengthen things in a way that is advantageous compared to that. So, it comes down to proper instruction, proper understanding and guidance, and it can be totally overcome.
Okay.
But it's not to say that that's not a risk. I would say be mindful of it, of course. Yeah.
And the same stands for the mobility. You can overdo mobility, and if it's not handled properly, you're putting yourself at risk.
Yeah. Anytime. You can overdo anything, especially from a physical perspective. It's very important to understand how the human body works in its cyclical process. So usually you have the training experience where you're creating stress that's hopefully going to create an adaptation in the body. Now, that adaptation happens during the rest and recovery phase. So if that rest and recovery phase is not adequate, or the body is struggling to get itself into a rest and digest mode or a parasympathetic tone, if the proper lifestyle factors aren't adding up and coming together in such a way that allows that process of recovery to go, and rather than so you train one day, you don't recover, and you train the next day, that's what's going to result in you're training something that's never recovered, and then eventually it's going to break down. So just coming straight back to the understanding that the majority of what we do in the gym or in the yoga room or any kind of physical training has to be coupled with its opposing counteraction of rest, good food and nutrition, sleep, and that will result in the process being complete.
I had a colleague who at some point he learned I'm into sports, and he was trying to explain to me that doing sports, it's actually like any type of physical exercise, it's wearing down your body. It's actually bad for you. You have to stay put in order to preserve for your proper body state, Is there any truth to that?
I would very much say no. There maybe there is a little bit in the sense that life is wearing you down, you know? The very aspect, we're all engaged in the process of dying from birth, you know? It's an inevitable thing. So, yes, there is some truth. I would say that's about the extent of the truth, though. I would encourage people heavily to think of movement as medicine. If you don't move your body, if you stay static for a very long period of time, there's a wide number of problems that you're creating for yourself. So healthy, regular movement is something that we've been biologically designed around since the beginning of time. It's clearly paramount to our ability to survive, and it's something that, due to the modern lifestyle, is not happening as much as it once was. And now, because we have adopted this more sedentary lifestyle, we're seeing all kinds of, let's say, musculoskeletal issues appearing, and arguably even more things, you know, from being static inside all the time. There's all kinds of mental health correlations that can be formed from that. So when it comes to movement on a daily basis, I would encourage everybody to move as much as they can, you know, given that they have some good guidance or clear instruction, that they're being mindful that they're allowing enough time to recover from whatever it is that they're doing. You know, you have this term allostatic load or stress in the body summates. So that what that means is that all the stresses that you have in your life stack up on top of each other, and your ability to accommodate that stress or not is going to be the differential factor. So you can imagine that if you are in a very balanced way of living, you have a very good recovery cycle, you have very good nutrition, sleep, very little stress, you can apply a lot of stress to your body because you will recover. However, if your body is kind of on the edge of a breakdown, you know, through constant chronic fatigue or stress or not sleeping enough, not eating well, a number of factors can go into that. And then you start training, well, then the training is a stress that your body can't afford to handle. And that's where it can become detrimental. So, you know, if you feel like you're not recovering, i.e. you're waking up tired all the time, and it might be a good opportunity to limit the training for some time, focus and prioritize some of the lifestyle factors that are going to enable proper recovery, see if you can get back on track and create more of a training window where you can optimally go and train. And, you know, in an ideal world, you want to be able to go, the reason that we train is so that you can go as hard at whatever activity that you want to do. You know, if you're a runner, you want to be able to run your entire life. So the reason that we train and we set our lives up in such a way is for that process.
So we don't actually have long enough lifespan to wear down this body, correct?
I mean, I think that, you know, we definitely can wear down the body for sure. And we are, you know, but I do believe that there, at the same time, there is definitely a pathway forward where you don't have to wear it down as quickly and as unnecessarily, and where a lot of the, you know, the let's say the age-related illnesses and obstructions to training that we see occurring are reversible through applying, you know, reasonably solid lifestyle factors and making sure that your solid fundamentals, hydration, eating, sleeping, are in place. And that and if you maintain those over the course of your life, you'll see less wear and tear. You know, there's no escaping wear and tear. It's never, you know, I don't believe that this idea that we're going to one day be able to live forever in the human body is tangible. I don't think it's an optimal idea or a good approach. You know, I think that the life cycle is there for a reason, and that one of the things that we should be willing to confront as a species is that the fact that the only thing that's guaranteed since birth really is that we are going to die.
Okay, but if we would need to summarize it into a thought experiment, let's take twin brothers who starting like, let's say 20 years old. One goes full on gym, running, swimming. The other one is also maintaining a healthy lifestyle, properly eating, but never lifting anything heavier than like a backpack.
Mm-hmm.
They are now 70 years old. Whose joints are feeling better?
I mean, if the other is so the person that's training, depending on the intensity that they're
Let's say he's doing it in an adequate manner, like
an appropriate,
yeah, with enough recovery, with proper guidance.
And the other one that was doing,
He was just like office worker who might go for a walk in the evening, but then yeah, it never runs, never lifts. Yeah,
my money's going to be on the person lifting and running. That's an estimation, because there is always the argument that can be, I've seen this longevity movement taking a direction of removing any of the peaks from, let's say, cardiovascular training, removing any of the peak stimulation in terms of like going to the park with your children and maybe jumping off a swing, because that causes an elevation in, and that there's an attempt to kind of level things out.
But it's like still active, but with no peaks. Okay.
And that's one of the, however, what I would, where I sit personally and how I relate to that is that I believe life is to be lived, and that it's in those moments of exhilaration where we maybe renegotiate some of the restricting factors, and we've had these breakthrough moments of insight and clarity. So, if you were to say to me, you might be able to live 5 more years longer if you remove some of those peaks from your experience, I would say, no, I'm going to keep those peaks, and you can have those 5 years. So it's definitely a personal choice there. But, I definitely see people that have adapted a thorough exercise routine enjoying longer periods of life, and also enjoying the later periods of their life more. Because one of the ways that you can think of movement and exercise is that once you stop doing something, it's very hard to get it back, especially as life progresses. It's very hard to kind of, at 70 years old, after having done no exercise, then pick up exercise and start it again. Whereas if it's been fundamental throughout the course of your life, it's easy to maintain it and keep going.
Running kills your knees. I've been running for the past 7 years, almost every day. I had my good deal of injuries, but my knees so far are doing well. Am I lucky? Am I exception? Or is it somewhere on the horizon for me?
Then, well, I mean, I would say running is something that we've done since the beginning of human history. If we don't have the ability to run, we probably wouldn't be here as a species. It's how we got our food. It's how we would have done a number of things. It's an important fundamental. What we have seen maybe is that people are now running on surfaces like cement. Very high rebound effect, very unnatural. The body has never seen something so hard as concrete. Now, that has its advantages as a construction material, but in terms of bouncing your body off it on a regular basis, I could see why that's going to destroy knees, etc., because of that. However, if you have the ability to run on natural surfaces as much as you can, softer surfaces, I do believe that, there is a certain amount of running that's very beneficial. You can certainly overdo it, like everything. And if the health of the human body is not at optimal, and you're running and the recovery is not being done, it's going to put more force on your knees than what you can handle. However, if you're able to bring the body into a certain level of health, you're able to recover properly, there's no reason why, running needs to destroy the knees.
What about 2 other points I keep thinking? The running technique, the way you land on that concrete surface, and the modern well-cushioned shoes. Do they help?
When it comes to the well-cushioned shoes, they're there's probably an argument in both directions that let's look at them. One is that the added cushion might mitigate the effect of this hard concrete, and that's perfectly reasonable, logical, probably beneficial. The other one is that because of the limited amount of feedback that you're able to receive through the foot, there is adjustments that are made to the running technique that then become slightly unnatural. And so I am a big advocate for kind of developing these primal patterns of movement, running as being one of them, or gait. They refer to walking and running as gait. And that, the foot's kind of communicating what's going on straight directly. There's a very established neural pathway from the mind to the foot. And so when there's a big cushion here and you don't necessarily detect the heel strike in the normal way, that's sending signals to the brain that it's unable to adjust for that cushion. You can imagine that cushion doesn't make a lot of sense to your brain. It's not able to add that into the equation of like, have I landed? So it's not able to adjust the body in such a way that might then result in there being an obscuration to the running pattern that could result in, I think that human beings in their natural state, the engineering is quite remarkable in a body. And that as we adjust and tweak these from places like cushioned shoes, we don't fully understand what could be, born from that. And so, I couldn't say concretely whether or not they're net positive, but that's something to be mindful of, that I would definitely advocate for spending more time barefoot and allowing your body to be in as natural of an environment as possible. I've definitely seen that is more fundamental than, the more we go into artificial and isolated environments, the more detrimental effects begin to show up. So the more you can reinstate your exercise to a more natural space with as little restrictions and, necessity for bracing or cushions, etc., it's better.
You can't build any muscle up to you reach 40, 50, 60 years old. Any truth to this?
Definitely some truth to it. It gets harder for sure. I mean, I'm 34, so yet to tackle this frontier from my own direct experience. But speaking with people that I've known and watched train, they definitely communicate that there is a slowing up of the effect. And you can understand that, as the body kind of ages, there's certain processes that it participates in for such a long period of time that it just can't run at that optimal. And you can see that in, different sports. There's an optimal age where people are able to kind of sustain a high level of physical output, and then that tends to drop away with the aging process. However, I do think that, even though the ability to build muscle might slow down, might become obstructed, there's definitely things that you can do to maintain and manage the situation so that it's not the end of the world. We definitely have to embrace the cycles of age. I don't think that we can transcend them. However, we can definitely make sure that we're not subject to them prematurely, or we can make the best of them.
But if we're not talking about building bulk or being bodybuilders, there are famous 60-year-old bodybuilders, by the way, but let's put them like in the exceptions box. But to just lead a healthy life where every morning is not like full of pain, just getting out of bed like makes you sore all over. Can we build enough muscle to support our normal body functioning during the day?
Totally.
Yeah,
for sure. I mean, I think that, I don't think that we need, obviously what it is that you're doing plays a factor. If you're lifting weights or you're trying to lift logs or something, then a fair amount of muscle mass is necessary. But for the ordinary person to get around, to maybe lift a box here and there, to get up and down stairs, to maybe pick up their grandchildren or whatever. Totally achievable.
Through going to the gym or taking yoga classes or doing mobility. Like, if I were your 60-year-old client, needing exactly that stability, being able to play with my grandchildren and not making it the last day of my life, like, what would be like a short recipe for that?
Resistance training, I think, is a fairly non-negotiable factor. I've found that especially things like osteoporosis in the bones, that our bones reinforce themselves when we move weight. So if we are consistently moving weight, we don't have to worry about the onset of osteoporosis, or it definitely helps in that fact. Muscles, ligaments, and tendons also use force to reinforce themselves. So if the one modality that I would say is fundamental, resistance training. Another one that I'd say is fairly largely important, cardiovascular fitness. The markers for that are quite clear. I think that, as you progress up the chain in cardiovascular fitness, your risk of all-cause mortality tends to drop fairly dramatically. Resistance training, i.e. moving weights, especially, doesn't have to be super heavy, but some, where you're working on these fundamental human patterns: push, pull, twist, squat, bend, lunge. Simple things, however, done regularly over time, help maintain the process. Because, if you look at what we've been through as a species over our generational history, movement and moving one thing from here to there has always been, or lifting something up to fix the shelf, it's always going to be there. It's very hard to construct a life where movement and the ability to kind of exert force is not there. So, yes, fundamentally, I would start with resistance training and some cardio, and then in tandem with that, like range of motion work that you do in mobility is amazing in order to preserve those patterns of movement. So, and you can kind of do both in an intelligent, like you can resistance train in such a way that you're preserving range of motion. And that if your resistance training is not just kind of short, sharp repetitions through a very small window of range of motion, if you open those ranges of motion up, then you kind of maintain range of motion whilst also strengthening and lengthening through those practices. So that's where I'd tell someone, I tell my mother all the time, she walks every day, and I say, walking's great, but do some body weight squats, do some find a way to move some weight around as regularly as possible, and it will serve.
No pain, no gain. How much truth is to the myth or a statement that if it doesn't hurt, you didn't do it enough. In terms of training your body, building muscle.
No pain, no gain, I think has, again, a binary lens that you can view it through. The detrimental way is that, pain is a signal in the body to indicate that something's wrong. So if it's hurting you, then the chances are that it's not being received very well by the system. So if you consistently do something that's hurting you, it's going to add up to an even bigger pain. So I would definitely be cautious of that. However, I think where it's been adopted in a positive way and where it can be used is that lethargy is not going to help. And that the majority of the time you can benefit from the act of discipline, getting up and doing something that serves a purpose rather than not acting. Whether or not that needs to be painful, I would definitely, investigate that. However, when it comes to the word pain, I would just definitely make sure that people understand you don't need to be in pain to be exercising. Sure, there's going to be challenge, but pain, be mindful of that, because pain is definitely there as a clear indicator to your body maybe something's not right, and maybe something needs to be adjusted.
Okay, 50 push-ups in a row or 5 times 10 push-ups in 10 minutes?
If you can do 50 in a row, sure, go
Well,
for it.
through a lot of pain and effort. And
Okay. So 50 is a lot of pain and effort. Here's the way that I would approach that, is that, you want to look at the form of the push-up. Very often there is a kind of an unstabilizing effect at the push-up. As soon as the arms go from straight, and you can see this a lot of times when people do a push-up, when the elbows bend,
yeah.
the shoulder blade goes into its fight or flight mode and goes up to here.
Uh-huh.
And so that's an indication that the form has begun to erode, or it's no longer optimal. When as soon as the shoulder blade does this, it's an indication that the amount of force that it's having to handle has exceeded its capacity, and it's retreating to a place of safety.
So basically you would say when you feel your shoulders are doing this, it's the moment to stop.
Yes, when you no longer can maintain form.
Okay.
That's where you would use the form as a guide. Because say, for example, you say 3 sets of 10, and on the 6th rep your form just falls apart. It's like, well, the problem could be that to squeeze out those last 3 repetitions with bad form is exposing you to a risk factor. So when it comes to negotiating, it's use form as the guide to see, because once the body starts making compensations, it's a cascading effect that leads to problems, and that's where we see overtraining be such a problem. It's not necessarily the fact that you're pushing too hard, but that you're not aware that when your body is breaking down form, that all kinds of things go on. So maintaining form and structure.
And that's another reason you would need a teacher or a mechanic that we touched upon in the previous episode. You need someone who would help you to understand when it's time to stop. Yeah, and maybe take another approach, or just give it a pause.
And then obviously someone that's teaching or training, if they're doing that job properly, it's kind of, I always think that eventually I want my students to not need me. I don't want to be necessary forever. Maybe in the beginning,
like a good parent.
Yeah, like constant guidance is necessary in the beginning, but you want to be empowering that person to understand when to know for themselves when their form is slipping, rather than me just having to be there watching them. So I think that you want to be in the beginning of something more dependent upon a coach and guidance. And then over time, you're still going to need those check-ins from time to time, but you learn to manage the understanding of how's my form? Can I feel that stability? And you'll start to be able to differentiate through sensation or feeling when a joint or when the exercise is being performed correctly, and then you're looking for that kind of balanced feeling at the end where the right stuff feels sore and that there's no like little nuanced pains that shouldn't be there showing up.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Always a big pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.